There's nothing.
Okay.
Good afternoon. As I announced yesterday, General Walter Cross, the Commander-in-Chief of the Transportation Command, is here to talk about the support that TRANSCOM provided to the deployments in the Gulf, and then to talk more generally about the TRANSCOM mission and take your questions on those and other topics of relevance to TRANSCOM. It gives me great pleasure to introduce a man many of you know from his service on the Joint Staff, General Cross. Thanks.
Thanks, Ken. Appreciate it very much. Well, good afternoon. Thanks for taking the time to come by so we can tell you a little bit about TRANSCOM, how the flow went recently, and then to answer some of your questions. As you can see, that's our mission, global mobility. That's why we exist. We exist for the warfighter. Getting to the fight is our main mission. We do that in both peace and war. These are our components. The Air Mobility Command providing our airlift and air refueling, everything from Air Force One to combat airdrop, as well as the teams that go in at the beginning of flows and are the last to come out. Our naval component is Military Sea Lift Command, and we operate a number of ships in various forms in partnership with the Maritime Administration, so that you could say that we have our hands on about 110 ships, including some of the very large medium-speed roll-on, roll-off ships, which, as you know, we're buying 19 of those. Only thing larger is an aircraft carrier. They're just phenomenal. And we also do all of our contract common user shipping here. Then our surface component is the Military Traffic Management Command, and they're in charge of everything from intermodal movements all the way down through household goods in peacetime. If you looked at this as a global intermodal transportation organization, it would be a $7.2 billion a year global operation, and operating in what I call all four modes. That's airlift, sea lift, surface, trucking, rail, and the fourth mode, which is a different one, it's actually passengers. And then a lot of specialized missions, including the only real air refueling capability that exists in the world. If you would compare it to something in the commercial industry, you would find that no other entity operates in more than two modes. Leave it up for a minute. In 1992, the Secretary of Defense signed a charter which made U.S. TRANSCOM the single manager for the defense transportation system, and operating that in peace and war. So we would have the seamless transition from peace to war. The same processes that exist in peace exist in war. We just surged them. So everything's lubricated. And it's very important because, as you know, when you've got to pull everybody together and get them all pointed in the right direction, process, exercise, frequent teams, the same people all the time, that's what makes things work. So this peace to war is the fundamental strategic element that makes TRANSCOM succeed for the warfighters. 156,000 plus people, active, Guard, Reserve, and civilian, plus our commercial partners. And the best way to describe TRANSCOM's capability is that we are essentially a one major theater war capability, supporting a two major theater war national military strategy. Now, we do that through the inherent agility of transportation forces, but we also do it through smart planning, great exercising, and continuous operation in peace and war. So that to be effective, we have to be efficient, and that makes all that work for us. So two war strategy, one war capability, but being able to make that swing is a very effective thing, and it does work. If you took it one level below that, you would find incredibly that all of this capability is only 30% active duty. It is another 30% total force, so to speak, our Guard and Reserve partners. And the other 40% of the capability comes from the cutting-edge U.S. transportation corporations in America today that we leverage through peacetime business so that they are there in contingency and in war. So 30, 30, 40. That's very significant. Next slide. No other nation does that. and I think that's what makes it very significant. This is our main war task, the high-end, the high-order reason why TRANSCOM exists, and that's to get to the fight in the two major theater war scenarios, and to move about that size of an operation, put in unclassified terms, obviously, and then be able to shift and do the same thing over here. And we actually have war plans that are reconciled and are able to do this so that we have this kind of a thing. Next slide. Question now?
Is there a time frame you have on that? That's all.
No, the time frame is not on that unclassified chart. We recently had a move that we in TRANSCOM used the name Phoenix Scorpion 2. We had Phoenix Scorpion 1 back when we made some movements around Thanksgiving, if you remember that. But so we call this one Phoenix Scorpion 2. And for about 2.5 weeks, we operated our active duty forces at pretty close to wartime rates. And we also had great volunteerism from the Guard and Reserve. And in the process, we moved a lot of things. You'll see the numbers in a little bit. But over this time period, across the bottom, you saw about 500 missions. Those are air refueling and airlift missions. Very C-5 and C-17 rich operation that moved first search and rescue forces over, then some initial ground forces. Then we moved in a lot of air elements that you were very familiar with that were discussed at this podium an awful lot. Made some intra-theater moves, so pre-position stuff. And this was not by air. This was actually a combination of air and surface. We had one of our chartered military Sealift Command ships, the American Condor, that was over there and did this and moved stuff from Oman up to Kuwait. Then we had some Patriots that we moved in, and then we had the Division Ready Brigade that came out of Fort Stewart and fell in on the preposition equipment in Kuwait. And we had some initial movements over here that just some Advon teams that moved in. So it was kind of a double spike, but it gives you a sense in terms of the daily departures across this time period. And setting up our air refueling tanker bridge and our airlift bridge, going both east and west to make this happen. Go ahead, please. Actually a very complex, very intense kind of an operation. If you took all of those piece parts and divided them into the various categories, you could see that the bulk of what we moved was that Division Ready Brigade out of Hunter Army Airfield near Fort Stewart down in Georgia. And it also shows you the various levels of effort. Put together in air mobility terms, this was the most efficient, smoothest flow that we have ever had. Next slide. Just moving to Division Ready Brigade, I just took that part of it here to give you a sense. You know, when you say you move out of Hunter Army Airfield, you have a tendency to think that you did everything down here. And by the way, there was one day down here that we actually had more C-5s on the ground than we had out at our largest operational base out at Travis, down here. But it shows you that there's an awful lot of pickups that are occurring all at the same time at different places. And it is a very complex operation. We have onload teams that are at each of these places. We also have folks that are inputting data so that we can see everything in our computers that's moving forward. And you can see just moving to Division Ready Brigade, we had this size of an operation, about 101 C-5 equivalents, 156 C-17 equivalents. We'll leave this board over on the side so you can get a sense of seeing all of the piece parts. Next slide. This is another way, the thing that I showed you on the earlier chart, we put it in its global context, because while we're supporting General Zinni in the move to the Gulf region, we also had all of our global customers, all the other warfighting sinks, and all of our other customers worldwide. This is just in the air mode of what we were doing. We're normally flying somewhere from 300 to 350 missions a day, all in different directions. On a given day, we could be landing on the ice in Antarctica, have a mission going into Kazakhstan, running a flow, an air bridge going east and west with a lot of refuelings, redeploying forces back to the States, doing training missions, bonding up with and flying airdrop missions with the 82nd Airborne at Fort Bragg, all kinds of things going on. And that's what's going on in this area here. Next slide. In the end, turns out these numbers look pretty round, but that's about what we actually moved. There's a certain law in this business too, that pretty much when you're moving combat forces, for about every passenger that you move about 1 short ton of cargo by air, even though you're falling in on prepositioned equipment and the like. It's just the nature of how we do our business. But we moved about 10,000 people and 10,000 short tons. And you can see in terms of C-5 equivalent missions, of course we used 141s, KC-10s. We even used KC-135s in the express air package mode, and of course our C-17s as well. And we did an air bridge in both directions, going east through Spain and the Mediterranean, and also going west across the Pacific through Guam and out to Diego Garcia. We brought our B-52s, if you remember. All these missions, we have a latest arrival date that's given to us as a tasking. Of all the missions, 1 mission arrived past its latest arrival time. So when I said it was the best that we've ever done, this talks to that extraordinary performance. And this is the performance of all the men and women who make this work. You know, there's a lot of sausage that gets made at the point of execution, a lot of duct tape used, so to speak. It's the men and women, active Guard, Reserve, and civilian, and our commercial partners in U.S. Transcom that made this happen. Slide off.
What's typical for a surge? 99.8 is the best you've ever had. What's typical?
If you were looking at the Desert Shield, Desert Storm numbers, or a contingency similar in size over the last couple of years, you would see anywhere from 80 to 90%. So this is very significant. This also doesn't get done by, how do you like me so far, U.S. Transcom. This gets done in partnership with U.S. CENTCOM, EUCOM, PACOM, because we're flowing forces through a global infrastructure. We're also getting a lot of base support from them as we move through these locations. It also requires the cooperation of our international partners as well. The countries that have to give us the diplomatic clearances on time, the access on time, and if we don't get that, we can't achieve these kinds of numbers. So we had tremendous cooperation from our partners in the Gulf, as well as those who help us along the way. England, Germany, France, Italy, Egypt. They have to give us all these clearances. So it's very, very important to us that we have this international thing working well. Slide off, please. And I'm very happy to take any other questions you might have.
Were you able to smoothly get overflight diplomatic clearance over some of the Mideast countries?
Yes, as you know, at the beginning, until there was discussion at a country senior level as to whether the people were going to participate, nothing was moving. But as soon as everybody gave us the green light, it worked very smoothly.
And you got permission to overfly all the countries you needed to overfly?
Yes, indeed. No country kept us out, if that was the nature of your question. Yeah.
There's been a lot of talk by the Air Force about their op tempo and how difficult it is to maintain. You said this was practically a wartime level of operations.
For our active duty forces,
yeah. About 3 weeks or so. 2 questions. How sustainable would this have been? If you were still doing it now, would you still be up at the 98 or 99% delivery on time rate? And can you say how this fits into the whole op tempo question or problem that the Air Force is having?
To answer your question in relation to the flow first, we have several graduated means of laying on more and more capability. The first one is to use our active duty forces and surge them, and at the same time go to the Guard and Reserve and get as much volunteerism as we can. And I cannot say enough about the tremendous volunteerism that we get. We have verbal agreements with the Guard and Reserve that when I ask, they will provide up to 25% of their wartime capability in peacetime for 30 days. And we were in that regime when we were operating this. We could have sustained this in that regime, in my view, 30 to 60 days. After that, we would have had to go to what I call you call Presidential Selective Reserve Call-Up, PSRC. As you know, the Secretary did get Presidential Selective Reserve Call-Up authority for us, but it was not necessary for us to use it, given that it was a short duration. If we had gone to another level, we would have also used it as well. But in that Presidential Selective Reserve Call-Up was about 3,000 Guard and Reserve for us, primarily crew members, but maintenance and aerial porters as well.
And
How it relates to op-tempo, as you're operating something like this, you are spending less time at home doing training. Turns out that the largest penalty for doing this kind of a contingency was that we stood down some of our training at our operational bases, not our schoolhouses, but our operational bases. And so we deferred what we call upgrade training, things like that. Over 300 sorties were deferred. And you could see the size, about 300, 500, you could see that would suck up most of it. We had very, very few global cancellations for channel missions, other support around the world. It was primarily in the training area. So in other words, we had more people on the road for about 2 to 3 weeks. As you know, we have this measure of merit of 120 days a year is our upper limit of where we like to be. So we kind of ate into that with this kind of an operation, and so we were very quick to stand it down and give our people compensating time at home. We have policies within our command that they would get between 4 and 5 days when they come back from an operation like this to charge their batteries, be with their families, and then get very intensely into training again before we get into another kind of a move like this. Did I answer your question okay?
Yeah, I did have a follow-up question, though. That is, if the Air Force has op-tempo problems with, I mean, they've got, I guess altogether there are about 30,000 American troops over in the Persian Gulf region. I think 8,000 are Air Force. You're not talking about major percentages of the military, and yet this seems to be a fairly taxing operation. What happens if there's a major contingency somewhere?
Well, yeah, there is that number, that you have 30,000, you might have a total of 50,000 deployed around the world. What's the problem? The difficulty is that we're rotating people back and forth, so everybody is sharing in this, and so you have folks going back, and we're doing it month after month, year after year, in this expeditionary mode, as our Air Force Chief, General Ryan, likes to call it. And so we got a lot of folks going back 4 or 5 times doing these kind of things. And so they're starting to accumulate a lot of op-tempo and purse tempo in this expeditionary mode. Our Air Force is not really designed to do that. And so you'll probably see some initiatives in the future to kind of reshape the Air Force around this expeditionary mode if we are to stay in it in any long period of time.
Can you shed any light as what the restructuring would be?
No, I think right now it's just an intent that the current structure is not matching the job jar, and we've got to figure out how to do that. This is the kind of thing that takes 5, 6 years, and you've got all kinds of complicating factors like base realignment and closure that you'd have to get through.
General Shelton has talked about, before Congress, about readiness issues within the military, and he's talked about anecdotal evidence in the foxhole and in the cockpit, he said, about readiness issues. Because a lot of your pilots fly the same type of planes that also are flown in the private sector, do you have a problem with keeping good pilots?
Oh, absolutely. When the Air Force has a retention problem, the leading edge of that retention problem is in our mobility air forces, our air refueling planes and our airlift airplanes. When the percentages are what they are, which is in the low 30s in terms of bonus take rates, you will find that we'll be in the low 20s. So we're feeling it much worse than the average that you see. The problem is a very serious one. It is a long-term problem. It is not going to be solved by short-term solutions, and we're going to have to look for ways to deal with that in a very, very long-term sense. But we are feeling our retention is very low, and if it stays at this level for about 2 more years, we will have to do some re-engineering of our rated force. You know, what percentages we have in staff jobs, those kinds of things will all be affected, because we are going to man our combat cockpits first, and there's going to be pressures to make some changes to the way we do our military planning, our military business, with rated officers on staffs.
Has it
Cockpits will
prevented
be the
you-
last thing that we'll have a problem in.
Has it prevented you from accomplishing any mission?
No. We are, when it comes to our air crew, we are fully manned, and we can meet all of our wartime rates. We are not limited at all by air crew at this time. If the bonus take rates stay what they are on the pilot side, in a couple of years, we may have some difficulties. We may start to see some holes in that. But like I said, the last place you'll see it will be in the cockpit, because we'll go through every kind of staff position that you can in order to man the cockpits. Yeah.
General, there's been talk lately about the C-5's reliability. How did that aircraft perform in this operation as of late?
Yes, we have been having C-5 reliability problems. They've been driven by spare parts and the fact that the aircraft has been with us for 25 years and that it is slowly dying off. You can go back year, and you can see a graceful degradation in mission capable rates and other measures of overall reliability. A C-5 will give you a dispatch rate, and you can see how a dispatch rate is just central to this whole thing. Give you a dispatch rate of 0.8. So you run it through 3 or 4 or 5 locations as you go around the loop, from pickup point to drop-off point to come back. You're doing 0.8 times 0.8 times 0.8. Pretty soon, you're not managing a flow anymore. You're trying to rescue a flow, and it's not what you want. You want to be up on the step. So you'd like to have your reliability up around 0.94, 0.95, and multiply that times each other, then you're running a flow. In other words, we need the reliability in the C-5 that we have in the C-17 and the KC-10. We know where the problems are on the C-5. We've been operating it for 25 years. They're in the engines, they're in the avionics, and a little bit in the hydraulics. We have engines that are on pods. We know how to put glass cockpits in planes, and hydraulics is not rocket science. So we know what we need to do, and I think as Synctrans, one of the things that we certainly would like to see is to see a modernized C-5 as we move into the 21st century. What we need is 250 to 260 large wide-body T-tails to do our job. It turns out that to do the peacetime job and the wartime job, you need about the same number of tails. Tails, tails, tails in peace, going in different directions. In war, everybody lines up and you lay the craft in on top of it and you got a heck of a capability. But you need long-range, reliable tails in order to produce for the warfighter what we need. To answer your question, however, when you get into a contingency, it always works better than you running 1 and 2 missions off in different directions, because you're offline, planes break, you got a lot more rescue going on. When you're running something like this, everybody's going in the same direction. You've lined up all of your maintenance, all the duct tape, so to speak, is sitting waiting for the airplane to land. You slap it on and it kind of keeps going. We actually had the C-5 perform very, very well in this very C-5-rich operation, as it turns out. We went into this with a mission-capable rate of about 65%, but the dispatch rate was actually maybe about 0.85 in that area, which wasn't bad. What you have in a flow is airplanes will break at the same rate, but you got more people right there to fix them faster, rather than something breaking in Africa and takes 2 days to go down and deliver an engine or something down there to get it fixed. Did I answer your question okay?
Yeah, we'll follow up though. You said between 250 and 260 T-tails to do the mission.
Right.
Is the C-17 counted within that? Is that
Absolutely.
part of,
That's what I'm counting is I'm counting 126 modernized C-5s plus the 120 C-17s.
Follow up on that slightly. Can you explain to us the rationale? I'm not quite sure I followed it so far. Why C-5M is the preferred route for TRANSCOM versus C-17s?
Oh, absolutely. It's the best route for a number of reasons. best value for the taxpayer. Can modernize. If you look at the numbers, you'll find that you can modernize 126 C5s for about the same price as you could purchase a squadron and a half of C-17s. A C-17 holds 18 pallets. A C-5 holds 36. It also holds 73 passengers above that. So you run a flow of 12 C-5s through a place, you can move 1,000 passengers while you're moving all that cargo. Because of investments that we made in the early 1990s and the late 80s to beef up the inner wing box of the C-5, the C-5 has 80% of its structural life ahead of it. It's very hard to walk away from a box that size when you know what the fix is. The fix does not require any technical risk. We're going to be looking at engines that are flying around commercially available today. The only R&D is to match the engine to the wing with the pod. That's not a big deal. So we also have other reasons. With the C-5, we have the trained crews. We have the spare parts. We have the buildings already built. We have the simulators. In other words, we have the system, the infrastructure. We have all the maintenance people that are trained to fix them. We have the people in our global en route system that know how to fix them. So this is, when you look at that ratio on a cost, it's compelling. When you look at all the other factors, it's extra compelling.
The C-17 fans say that you're still not going to get the reliability even on a C-5M that you're getting now on the C-17s. You think that's a trade-off, though, you can live with?
The short answer to your question is yes, we can live with it. You just have to get it in the same range. The dispatch rate on a C-17 is 0.96. With these kinds of improvements, we can get it into the 0.94 range. That's plenty close enough for me, and well beyond what we've ever had in the C-5 to this point. If we ever got to that point, it would be pure karma for me.
Historically, there's been problems of things getting shipped to a region, and then, you know, the tanks end up over here and the troops end up over there, the trucks end up over and somewhere else. I mean, is that Transcom's responsibility, and how have you handled it in this operation compared to 91?
It's actually it requires a lot of teamwork to get this right, but Transcom has a responsibility for what's called in-transit visibility, to make sure that the receiving warfighter can see what's coming so that he can efficiently act on it, whether it's to go out and meet his troops as they arrive in the theater or to send out teams to drive the tanks, APC. So he's got to know when the plane's coming and what's on it. Not only that, but what order it's on the plane, so he can line up his load teams efficiently and all those kinds of things. This major offload of this Division Ready Brigade Plus really occurred at Kuwait. And we learned an awful lot of things in terms of in-transit visibility on this. We learned that this had the finest in-transit visibility of any military operation that ever occurred. We have been improving on this over the last several years. The key thing that happened was last February, 13 months ago, we fielded the Global Transportation Network, GTN. And this is essentially a web-based system. You get your password, you get on, you can see what passengers with cargo, planes, everything else that's in here. We have over 6,000 accounts and growing. It's everything from directors of logistics on warfighting staffs all the way down to supply sergeants in tents on these accounts. We found that the warfighter was very, very interested in knowing where all of this stuff actually was in this operation. The percentage of ITV was 98% on the passenger side and 96% on the cargo side. That's incredible. You saw all of those pickup points. To achieve that, you actually have to have load teams. Not load teams to load the planes, that's obvious, but data load teams. And so what we've been doing over the last several years is we've been building these load teams, keeping the load teams together, And at each major exercise, like Cobra Gold in the Pacific or Bright Star in Egypt, we've been lubricating all of those processes and working so that we in U.S. Transcom provide the load teams and make sure that the data is in the computer before the aircraft taxis, certainly no later than 1 hour after the aircraft is airborne. And when you got an 18-hour flight, if you got the data in that fast, you're getting it well in advance so that the receiving warfighter can work with it. This is a major advance from the time that we did Desert Shield and Desert Storm. There's a lot more technology, a lot more automation, but also a lot more cooperation and a lot more process improvement than we ever had before, and we've learned our lessons from that time. Thank you for the question.
A bit of an esoteric question, but you mentioned computers and automation, and a lot of what you do interfaces with the FAA. The year 2000 problem, how much does that affect your command and the ability to do your job?
It affects it an awful lot. We are aggressively pursuing year 2000 in all of our components, as well as at U.S. Transcom. We have a very good site picture. We will have all of our systems in compliance 1 year prior if everything stays on track. But we're not stopping there. There's a tendency to look at the year 2000 as things that are related to computers. We're taking it all the way down into smoke detectors in a building and the kinds of things that you don't think about.
Embedded systems.
Yeah, this is a civil engineering problem as much as it is a chief information officer problem. And so we're very aggressive about this. I hold a lot of meetings on this subject because we are essentially an information command first and a transportation command second. And so this is top priority in our command.
A lot has been said about spare parts shortage and increased cannibalization rate. I was wondering, to support this mission, what did you do to make enough parts available, or did you really have to rely a lot on cannibalization? And has that had any effect on the other locations? And how about now? Is there actually a shortage even greater now to support this mission?
Well, that's a very good question because just prior to going into this operation, because of conditions extant within the Air Force and the kinds of things that you see going on in depots these days, we have had some undercapitalization of spare parts that has caused us to increase our cannibalization rate. But we actually picked up on this about last October, and through the aggressive leadership of General Ryan, the great cooperation of General Babbitt and the men and women in the Materiel Command, we were able to get a lot of this in place prior to this operation. And by realigning the processes that were necessary and getting the kind of focus started several months ago, when we did go up on the step, we asked for even more. And the Materiel Command responded mightily to that. Now, when you conduct an operation, you consume spare parts at a greater rate. So there is what we call a bow wave requirement that has developed. But we know the size of it. It's well documented, and I'm working with both General Ryan and General Babbitt and have gotten their commitment to work that bow wave off between now and the summertime.
How much cannibalization did you actually do during this mission? Was there do you have any cannibalization rates you can share with us, or
I think the best way to describe this was that in the fall, we for us to be healthy, what you have is, let's talk about the C-5 force. You should have one canned bird at Dover and one canned bird at Travis. When you start to have spare parts problems, you end up having more than one canned bird at these locations. Well, in the fall, we did. We had a fistful more. But as we started into this operation, we had worked it down to where we only had one canned bird at each location. And that's a good sense of how relatively healthy we were as we started this operation. One of the indicators that you would expect that I would watch as we were doing this operation to see if the spare parts would keep up with the consumption, so to speak, of the force was to watch the count on the canned birds. So I was looking for a logistics wall, and it was always out there next Thursday. and we were kind of staying ahead of it. We knew that it was next Thursday. And the first indication would be that we would start to see more canned birds. In fact, we never got above 2 canned birds, so we were pretty lucky.
What is a canned bird?
A cannibalization bird, that is a bird that is down because the spare parts are short enough that there's a hole in that plane. I can't even get it out of the depot.
So it's there to be cannibalized, or it has been cannibalized?
It has been cannibalized, and it is there to be cannibalized. It is actually part of our process. The canned bird is usually a bird that's in the hangar having other work done on it, and we count it as a canned bird.
If that German plane that collided with C-141 off Africa had TCAS, would that have collision occurred?
My personal opinion is that if the C-141 had had TCAS on it, we probably would have avoided that crash. That's my personal opinion.
Did the German plane have, that didn't have TCAS, did it?
No, neither plane had TCAS to my knowledge.
Were the transponders, was it the same type of transponder,
Yeah.
so you could have detected the other plane? Because that's the key.
In the end, there is a safety report that will be out later this month that will reveal those kinds of things to you.
Seems like the answer is yes, if you're saying this.
I'd like to ask you, similar to the Y2K problem question, GATM, problem you're having there is that the civil side isn't really defining it very hard, so given that you have to palm things and you have a very structured process, how are you going to deal with that? Which is what for you is not only a large bill, but a large number of aircraft you have to do work on.
Yes, the number of aircraft that you're talking about in terms of our air refueling and mobility aircraft, it's about 1,500 airplanes. So this is a very large problem. We are experiencing limitations today in global air traffic management. Our KC-135 force is not allowed to fly at certain altitudes over the Atlantic because it doesn't have the right comparators in its pitot-static system to kind of guarantee the altitude separation. So it's held at lower, less efficient altitudes. So they're the ones that have to be worked first, and we are working them very, very hard. 18 months ago, the Department of Defense didn't even have a term named GATM. Now we have Secretary, the DepSecDef, the JCS, all the service chiefs, full square behind GATM, and we have about $1.5 billion in the President's budget aggressively going after global air traffic management, and virtually all of that money is against this get-to-the-fight mobility Air Force fleet. This is not on the fighters, so to speak. It's on the airplanes that need access to the airspace to get the troops to the fight. I must tell you that in our role, we have very, very close relationships with the commercial airline industry, both cargo and passengers, and we deal very closely with them through things called the Airlift Committee, et cetera, the Civil Reserve Air Fleet. They are as spun up about GATM as we are, and are working very, very hard to get their fleets worldwide compliant, so to speak. Our problems are actually somewhat different. You can see that every one of those 1,500 aircraft that are in here need to be globally compliant and have the full suite, so to speak, to go in every direction. While if you're operating Delta or United, the tails that you keep on the European routes only have to have maybe 60% of that equipment. And the ones over here in Pacific might need 80%. So they have a slightly different problem, but they have a big investment problem. And it still takes them an awful lot of time to get things on planes. So we are partnering with them in trying to shape this global requirement. And then to make our case with the Federal Aviation Administration, and Ms. Garvey is very cooperative in this area, and then to take that forward into the international body where we only have one vote, the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO. The sub-ambassador up there is also very cooperative. But it is very important that we shape the requirement, because if you don't, you can get in a situation where you can be voted to have something that's very expensive, when you might be able to have something that's less expensive and save billions of dollars. An example, oh, you need to have 2 satellite-based data links. Well, how about 1 satellite-based and 1 HF data link, so you can exploit the infrastructure that you and the commercial aviation industry that operates now use, and you can save a lot of money. So we're partnering to kind of go off in that direction, for example, rather than to go for the cosmic solution.
You have time, Steve, you want one more question?
General, the Army recently expressed interest in acquiring a C-1, or the Air Force acquiring the C-130 variant to meet its mobility requirements for Army After Next. They said that while they were satisfied with the C-17, it wasn't quite what they wanted for the future. What do you think of that, idea, or they work with them on that so far, or whatever?
Yes, we are looking at the C-130J as the future variant for the C-130. We did a Tiger team. The Mobility Air Forces all got together. And we did a Tiger team review of what I call an upside-down, inside-out force structure. And to do everything from re-engineering our training to deciding what the force is going to look like in the future. As you know, right now we have 5 different C-130 variants, and we can't interfly them. It's like having 5 C-130 fleets. What we want is to take all of those and to make one GATM-compliant version, so you can call it the C-130X, whatever you want to call it. That'll be the bulk of the force. And then to start buying the C-130J, so that you've got a modernized version. So we've been down to 2 versions that are both GATM compliant. And I think you need to look for that as our future in the C-130 as we move into the 21st century. And the Army will be very happy with that.
What's the XJ breakdown?
I'd like to keep my powder dry on that because this is a POM initiative. We're coming through the C-5 modernization that we talked about. That's a POM initiative. We're coming right to the front door. We have a case. We're going to make the case. On the C-130 modernization, we've already briefed the Secretary and we briefed General Ryan. They are most supportive of the plan. The trick's to fund it. And we're coming through the front door as a POM initiative. But I think if you take a look in the summertime, you'll be able to see what those numbers are, and I think you'd find them very appealing. If we do buy a C-130J, we're only interested in the stretch version, because the airplane's got a lot of power, and why carry 5 pallets when you can carry 7? Thank you all very much for your time, and especially during your lunch hour. I appreciate it very much.
I've got